Oh man.
And then I'm gonna put it on our movie for Mrs. Superior Gilley's class.
Nice.
I know.
Nice.
Only we have a better camera than this.
I like it.
Henry, what's it feel like being a celebrity?
What? Oh, I love it. I do feel, it does feel like The Office.
That's an inside view.
Oh.
You getting water?
Where is
Mom,
it?
I thought you I don't know.
We could go to Cafe Yum.
Yeah,
we could go to
Congressional here.
Ross Dress for Less.
Go get food.
I
Yeah, we can go play mini golf.
I should
on this particular issue over the course of the semester, and it's our pleasure to meet with you all this morning, take the time to hear about what you've studied and learned in this particular format. I'm going to ask my colleague to introduce herself first, and then I'll go ahead and follow up. Then we'll go ahead and do your introduction. I would ask that you speak slow so I make sure that we correctly hear the pronunciation of your name. We'll read the question and go forward with the discussion.
Hi everyone, I'm Aaliyah Blank. I'm a sophomore at Lincoln and I was on Unit 6 this past year. And I'm very excited to see what you guys have studied and learned and can't wait to learn more.
And good morning students and audience. My name is Jason Trombley and this fall will be my 14th year coaching the Lincoln High School Constitution team. I'm an alumnus of the program from the 2000-2001 team where we placed third in the country that year. In my day job, I serve as a policy advisor for Representative Alyssa Koenig-Geyer in the state legislature, where I work on housing policy as well as foster care. And so I know exactly what you're going through as students, so this is one of the things that I love doing every year, because it gives me a sense of who the students I hope to get the chance to work with when they're in high school. So with that, enough from hearing from us talk, students, it's our pleasure to ask that you introduce yourselves.
Good morning, I'm Ewan Boyd. We are Unit 1. We have studied about John Locke.
I'm Lars Kunis.
I'm Tian Huang. I'm Reed Miner.
I'm John Corzine, and thank you for listening.
Thank you all very much. I'll read the question and we'll get started. The question this morning is as follows. John Locke was an English philosopher who thought about why it was necessary to have a government. What did Locke think would happen without government? What did John Locke believe to be the purpose of government? Do you think government might have purposes that Locke did not mention? Explain your answer. With that, students, please begin.
John Locke was an English philosopher that developed many of the founding principles of our American government as we know it.
Some of John Locke's beliefs was that a state of nature is a place without a government, and that some living in it can do as they want as long as it is within the bounds of the laws of nature.
John Locke that in a state of nature, people do not have their natural rights of life, liberty, and property protected or guaranteed. He also believes that the purpose of government should be to protect the people's natural rights. John Locke's philosophy influenced the Founding Fathers when they drafted the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. John Locke's ideas were referenced in the 8th Amendment of the Constitution, which states that no cruel or unusual punishments may be inflicted. The Supreme Court case Pierce versus the Society of Sisters deals with an orphanage that challenged the power of a state law that requires children to attend public school. The Supreme Court ruled in favor of Society of Sisters, stating that the state government was not given the power to force children to go to an educational facility. Providing education is a purpose of government that Locke did not mention, although it needs to be maintained so that the government cannot abuse that power.
The Supreme Court case Gideon versus Wainwright also relates to John Locke's central ideas. In the case, Gideon challenged a Florida law that only provides court-appointed lawyers in capital criminal cases and not in minor criminal cases or civil cases. Gideon thought that it violated terms of the Sixth Amendment and of due process of the law. The court ruled in favor of Gideon because they believed every citizen should have a fair chance to defend himself in court against the power of government or law.
In the U.S., mass incarceration is threatening the liberty and freedom of Americans. It is also a vicious cycle that forces people into jail, taking away their liberty. People of color are more likely to be arrested, and once sent to jail, their background is permanently stained, causing them not to be able to get a good job. This forces these people back into crime in an attempt to get more money.
Benjamin Banneker was a free African American born in 1731 who believed that slaves and free blacks should be granted all rights of being a citizen, including the right to life, liberty, and property. Banneker wrote a letter to Thomas Jefferson concerning this. Even though Jefferson liked the idea, nothing changed. Benjamin Banneker's ideas reflect Locke's ideas on guaranteed liberty for all citizens, and they also reflect the 14th Amendment.
Throughout history, there have been countries that in many ways have lived in a state of nature for periods of time. Somalia, a country located in the Horn of Africa, went without a government for 15 years, starting in the 1990s. And it has been ripped apart by clan militias, pirate gangs, and Islamist extremists. This reflects what John Locke thought would happen in a state of nature.
In the Supreme Court case Vernonia School District versus Acton, Acton challenged the school district's ability to pass a mandatory drug test, citing the Fourth Amendment and an invasion of privacy. The Supreme Court ruled against Acton, saying that balancing the intrusion on the individual's Fourth Amendment interests against the promotion of legitimate governmental interests. Although Acton lost the case, it goes to show how citizens will stand up to protect their natural rights of life, liberty, and property that Locke thought should be guaranteed.
In the case Juliana versus United States, a group of teenagers took the U.S. to court, pressing the government not to use fossil fuels. They argued that climate change will soon affect their futures and break their rights to life, liberty, and property. They are going to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in Portland, Oregon on June 4, 2019. John Locke once said, "The end of law is not to abolish or to restrain, but to preserve and enlarge freedom. For in all the states of creative beings capable of law, where there is no law, there is no freedom."
Great, thank you. First question.
What are some natural rights? Give me a few natural rights that you think.
Life, liberty, and property, the rights that John Locke thought should be guaranteed.
The founding fathers also included pursuit of happiness.
Are there any more that you think we should add or think about?
Freedom of speech is very important to people who are in court or who
want to voice their opinion and change the world for the better.
Not just freedom of speech, freedom of expression of any kind of religion and of speech or of protesting.
So, John, I'd like to follow up on your example with your citation on the Vernonia School District v. Acton case, and specifically talking about drug tests. So I'm going to single your teacher out for a second, which is, if your teacher, Ms. Campbell, thought for any reason that any of your peers were doing drugs, do you think she would have any reason to ask if you're doing it? Because you talked about a really important case. So if she suspected that, do you think she should ask her parent first before asking you if something is going on?
I think that she should talk to the parent first so that the child isn't facing it unexpectedly and not embarrassed.
And she could also be violating the student's Fourth Amendment, violating the amendment of searches and seizures, because she might not have reasonable suspicion.
So you guys talk about freedom of expression. Do you think that freedom of expression is important to have in schools?
Well, yes, I think it's very important because even students can express their ideas. This was very much displayed in the case Tinker versus Des Moines, where the students wanted to wear white armbands to protest, and that's they need to be able to express their beliefs because I feel even students can protest and try to change things for the better.
And also in another court case called Pico versus the Board of Education, Pico was a student that wanted these 11 books to be unbanned, because originally these 11 books were banned for being anti-Semitic, anti-American, and anti-Christian, and right there he could have his freedom of expression by protesting against the banning of the books.
But freedom of expression needs to be limited too, so that, for example, in the case of the Fraser case, he used very explicit language, and that didn't serve any educational purpose. So it needs to be limited in some sort too.
So you all have identified you put nice bookends to this issue of freedom of expression. So next year you're going to be in high school. If one of your classmates, either here or another ninth grader, happens to wear a hat or a shirt that has the slogan or tagline, "Make America Great Again," do you think the principal should tell the student to not wear that particular hat or t-shirt?
No, it should be. It is a part of freedom of expression is also being able to express your political beliefs also. So wearing that shirt shouldn't be a problem.
And he's showing his opinions peacefully. He isn't violently doing anything. So I believe that it's okay for him to wear the t-shirt.
But like Tina was saying, it needs to be restricted. Also, not having like violent terms or anything. That was just peaceful.
Okay. Shifting gears a little bit, you talk about the state of nature, so not having a government. What do you think are some benefits to having a government?
A government's purpose, as John Locke believes, is to protect natural rights, which are the rights to life, liberty, and property, and they're only guaranteed to be protected in when there is a government, and when a place is a state of nature, they're not guaranteed.
And John Locke also believed that in a state of nature, the stronger would prey on those who are weak. So, if there was a government, that wouldn't happen, and it would be power would be more balanced.
Reed, I'd like to follow up on one of the points you made in your prepared statement on Gideon versus Wainwright and the point of defendants being able to properly or effectively defend themselves. What's one thing you think that we could do to ensure that that right actually is accessible to everyone?
Well, for one, the entire Gideon case is about getting always being guaranteed an attorney, which is one thing, and there's also being able to make sure the jury is fair and non-biased can also make sure the court is more fair, the entire court setting is more fair and just towards the person being prosecuted.
And allowing good attorneys to be appointed to people that are poor and can't afford their own good attorney, and not just have the bottom of the barrel for them.
And if they didn't let the prosecutor have an attorney, that would be violating their Sixth Amendment right. So the prosecutor could always take that to court.
All right. She has the toughest job, which is to cut us off from questions and hearing the good stuff you have to say.
The Declaration was written to declare the colony's independence from Britain due to violations of the colonists' rights.
Two acts that led to the Declaration were the Stamp Act and the Quartering Act. The Stamp Act imposed a tax on all paper products coming into the colonies. The colonists who had to pay taxes were enraged because they had no representation in Parliament. The Quartering Act required the colonists to house and feed British soldiers. The colonists felt that Britain was threatening their rights and becoming oppressive.
The Declaration of Independence contained many principles of good government like the natural law philosophy, unalienable rights, consent of the governed, and the ability to abolish an unjust government. Consent of the governed is when the people agree to be governed. Unalienable rights are rights that cannot be taken away or denied, and natural law is an unchanging set of laws that govern human relations.
Documents and philosophers also influenced Thomas Jefferson while he was writing the Declaration. One of the main documents was the Virginia Declaration of Rights, which established the idea of unalienable rights. John Locke was the main philosopher that influenced Jefferson. He believed in the idea of natural rights, where the government's purpose is to protect the people's rights to life, liberty, and property.
The Declaration was created in 1776, and nearly 100 years later, the 14th Amendment was adopted to our Constitution. to give freed slaves the same protection under the law that white men had. The Declaration and the 14th Amendment both have an underlying message of equality. The 14th Amendment states that has the Equal Protection Clause, and the Declaration states that all men are created equal. The 14th Amendment has evolved in the past 2 centuries and is the most cited in Supreme Court cases today. At first it only included white males, but later on more minorities were introduced.
The 14th Amendment covers the right to due process and the Equal Protection Clause. The Equal Protection Clause states that no state can deny any person equal protection under the law. This was challenged in the 1896 case of Plessy v. Ferguson. Homer Plessy violated a state law that separated train cars depending on their race. Plessy sat in the whites-only car as he believed that the law violated the Equal Protection Clause. Plessy then went to the Supreme Court and he voted in favor of the state because if the cars were equal, the 14th Amendment was met.
A case that had to do with due process is the Roe v. Wade case. This case dealt with women's right to choose, in other words, a liberty that Jefferson might not have seen, but still, one that has been implied to the Supreme Court. In this case, they ruled 7-2 that the right to privacy extends to women's reproductive rights.
Mary Wollstonecraft was a philosopher and advocate for women's rights in the 1700s. She wanted the same opportunities that men had. At the time, women could only hold menial jobs and their rights were limited. In the 1971 case of Reed v. Reed, the Supreme Court interpreted the Equal Protection Clause as prohibiting gender discrimination. 200 years after Wollstonecraft advocated for women's rights, women were granted equal protection under the law.
The most recent addition to the protections of the 14th Amendment were people who are LGBTQ+. This community is often treated differently or unfairly. The first LGBTQ+ case was the One Incorporated versus Olison case in 1958. This case had to do with a pro-gay newspaper that was shut down by the FBI because they believed that the magazine contained obscene content. Both the trial court and Court of Appeals voted in favor of the FBI, but the Supreme Court voted in favor of the magazine.
There is one more group that doesn't include the Equal Protection Clause: immigrants. The crisis at our southern border shows how they aren't being treated equally. Even though immigrants have been granted equal protection, President Trump is disregarding this fact and treating immigrants horribly.
George Bernard Shaw, a political advocate, once said, "Progress is impossible without change, and those who cannot change their minds cannot change anything." Change is important because without change, there would be no 14th Amendment, Constitution, or equal protection under the laws.
All right, thank you. So, Aubrey, I'd like to go right into one of the points you brought up and then prepared, which is under the principles of the Declaration of Independence is the concept of the consent of the governed. And so one element where individuals give their consent is through voting. Right now, there is a bill in the legislature that would actually lower the voting age from 18 to 16. Would all of you be in support of lowering the voting age? Why?
I think that we shouldn't lower it, even though we all have rights, but as a 16-year-old, we don't have, our minds aren't fully formed that we are. And with all the other laws being up to 18 and having that peak of our age being 18, it's a difficult topic to think because everyone's different with their mindset. However, I think that the majority of 16-year-olds are still not very well thought on their government standpoints.
I agree with Chloe because although consent of the governed should apply to everyone, after 16 you'll be 18 in just 2 years and you can express your consent to be governed then.
I like to think of it as 16 to me is more of the age where you can finally get your driver's license, and 18 is the age where you're considered an adult. And to me, 18 is a good age because if you're 18 and, like Chloe said, your mind has developed more and you see more of like the world point of view, not just you and your point of view.
However, there are still many other ways that they can express their political beliefs, whether it's joining the constitutional group, or you could protest, you could, show your opinions by wearing shirts, hats, to go to rallies. Voting is not the only thing you can do to express your opinions. Even though it's an important one, you could still do many other things.
Well, I'm almost 16. I'll be 16 in 2 months. I participate and I care about government and it affects me. So you guys, no one thinks at all that we should lower the voting age because I would be affected. I could vote in November. So no one thinks that we should lower it?
You're a good example because you're very good with government and you know a lot about it, but I know you guys know someone that does not know a lot about government. But people over the age of 18 still don't know a lot about government. However, a lot of people would make stupid choices with who they vote. Like there have been stupid choices with voting favors, but lowering the age won't fix the idea of stupid people voting. I mean, I'm using crude terms. I mean, not the most educated people about it, but it's just a matter of when they turn 18, they'll understand more and they're going to have more of a concept of government.
So you talk about them not being educated. How do you think we should fix that so people are educated and they know how to vote properly or well?
What we're doing now, because learning about this in a school setting is very important. It not only teaches us about government, it teaches about the rights of government, what rights we do have, and it brings up topics that we can argue about as a group. And I hope everyone agrees that this is important that we're learning about this.
Lucy, I'd like to follow up on your discussion and prepared on kind of the expansion of rights as it relates to individuals who identify as LGBTQ+. Honest assessment, which is, how do you think we're doing as a society to ensure that all of the rights that we as a community believe are fundamental are in fact applicable to communities who identify as LGBTQ+? Are we doing okay, or are there areas that we need a lot of work to do?
I think that even if our Constitution and our laws say that you're not supposed to discriminate against the LGBTQ community, people still do it. And there is an act that was introduced in 2015 called the Equality Act.
Mark Pocan is a congressman the senator of Wisconsin, and he wants to pass the Equality Act because despite the 14th Amendment, there's still a lot of discrimination against people in the LGBTQ community. And an example of this is the Masterpiece Cake Shop case.
And that's about this couple who owned a cake shop, and a gay couple wanted a cake from there, and the owners refused because they were very against LGBTQ.
In your prepared, you guys talk a lot about women's rights, Roe v. Wade, and how that was an implied right to privacy. So nowhere in the Constitution does it say exactly that we have a right to privacy. Do you think we should add an amendment being very explicit that we should have a right to privacy?
I think yes, because everyone should have the right to privacy and have like a boundary where we should have like our own space. It's kind of like when we have like our own room, we all have like our own space and we're not like all together crammed in one little room.
And the right to privacy is also kind of a mush of multiple amendments, like the 4th Amendment, and there's like multiple amendments that they basically mushed together to create the right to privacy. And I think, and the 9th Amendment, which states that even if there are rights that are not written in the Constitution, but they are implied in the Constitution. And so if the right to privacy is implied, right? So I think if it is implied, then we should, and so many people state the right to privacy in Supreme Court cases, that it would be a really good idea to put it in as an actual amendment.
Okay. So I'm going to start with, we pushed you very significantly in this line of questioning. And so I think my overarching observation is I was impressed with all 5 of you for the fundamental reason is that you held your ground and were able to push back on us. and that is not easy. And so I want to be able to acknowledge that. Y'all came to play. Good, I like that.
Ready to go.
All right, so before we do that, I want to make sure we do the names one more time.
Gotta slow it down
Yeah.
just a little and really say it clearly.
I'm Ryder Rogers.
I'm Maya Hendrickson.
I'm Jake Molesky.
I'm Leonie Push.
And I'm Charlotte Octor.
All right, for the good of the audience, your question this morning is, Article 2 of the Constitution lists the powers of the President of the United States. Describe some of the powers the Constitution gives to the President. Give examples of how presidents have actually used these powers. Some of the opponents of the Constitution feared the President would become a king and a tyrant. Why did they think this? Do you think their fears were justified? Are there any powers you would like to see added to the presidency? And finally, are there any powers now granted to the presidency that you think should be omitted? Explain your answers. With that, please begin.
At its founding, the delegates of the Constitutional Convention saw what America would become. They saw its new advantage for becoming a country based on just laws and connecting the government and the people to create a democracy. They spelled out the rules and responsibilities of the people and their elected representatives, as well as their rights and the power they may hold.
In Article 2 of the Constitution, the Founding Fathers described the powers of the President and the limits to those same powers. The President has the power to veto a bill, or to stop it from turning into law, to pardon people from federal crimes, and to negotiate treaties with foreign nations. The President can also appoint federal posts.
The founders also created a system of checks and balances to ensure that no one branch of government has more power than another. James Harrington, a political theorist, believed in a government with separation of power. Harrington also believed in a republican system of government where the government is run by representatives who are elected by the people. The delegates at the Constitutional Convention were influenced by his ideas and limited the executive branch's powers.
After the delegates announced their new constitution, not everybody was pleased. Many people thought a strong national government would result in tyranny.
Some opponents of the Constitution were the anti-federalists. They feared that the president would become like a king. George Mason, who was a delegate from Virginia and attended the Constitutional Convention, said that, quote, "may frequently pardon crimes which were advised by himself." They thought that he would abuse his pardoning powers to pardon crimes that he took part in.
Despite protests, the Founding Fathers created the system of government, agreeing that the branches should be completely balanced. In Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution, it says that the President has the power to serve as the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. But in Article 1, Section 8, it says that the President does not have the power to declare war, rather Congress does. The President can appoint federal judges and ambassadors, but Congress must approve them. Though delegates wanted executive power to be balanced with those of the other branches.
Issuing executive orders is another power of the president. An example of a president using his power is in Trump versus Hawaii. Trump issued an executive order that discriminated against Muslims by preventing people from 7 countries that are predominantly Muslim from entering the United States. The Supreme Court upheld his travel ban, showing how executive power can be used.
The Constitution also lays out a way for the president to remove from office called impeachment, and is explained in Article 1, Section 3, and Article 2, Section 4 of the Constitution.
This came up in a case of United States versus Nixon, where President Richard Nixon's administration tried to cover up his involvement in the Watergate scandal. Edited transcripts of many Watergate-related conversations from the Nixon White House were made public by Nixon. After reviewing the tapes, the committee approved 3 articles of impeachment towards Nixon, which were then reported to the House of Representatives. Nixon ended up resigning before impeachment. This case shows the limitations of presidential power.
More recently, a federal district judge determined that President Trump's accounting firm must hand over documents to Congress related to an ongoing investigation of Trump's finances. Similar to the Nixon case, if Congress has power of impeachment, it should also be able to investigate the president, such as events like the Watergate scandal.
We believe there should be more oversight on what the president says and does. One power we believe should be omitted is the power of a national emergency. The president should not have the power to declare a national emergency if a situation is not really an emergency. This came up with the Trump administration when President Trump declared that the flow of illegal immigrants traveling into our country constituted the need for a national emergency. Congress should have to approve a national emergency to ensure that the president doesn't abuse this power. We don't think any power should be added to the president. The president, especially in the last couple of years, has gained too much power.
As U.S. citizens, it often feels like our voices aren't heard by people in power. As 8th graders and as minors, we aren't able to vote, but that doesn't mean we can't make a difference in our community and in our country. The fear of the president becoming too powerful is just as much of a concern today as it was in the past, and learning about these things as students will help us in the future when it comes to fulfilling our jobs as U.S. citizens.
All right. There was a lot of good info to jump on, so I'm going to go right for it. Jake, you talk about the president's power of declaring a national emergency. Congress passed legislation called the National Emergencies Act, which says under what standards the president can call for a national emergency. So given your discussion and the prepared statement, is that a particular legislation where you will revoke and basically say only Congress can declare a national emergency, the president should not have the power to do so?
Yes, Congress should be the one who has the power because there's more than just one person making the decision. There's many people who can debate instead of one person having the power to make whatever decision they want, that even if the emergency is not really an emergency. Having Congress vote would make sure that it's really an emergency and we really do need the emergency powers of the president.
I actually disagree with Jake. I think that in some situations the president should be able to declare a national emergency. For example, Abraham Lincoln used this power of a national emergency during the Civil War, which in that case was an actual emergency for our country. But there should be more limitations on that power.
I'm going to have to agree with Jake because I feel like the Congress, especially like more recently, can voice the opinion for a lot of different people because America has always been a place for a lot of immigrants, and so that means there's a lot of different people that we need to represent when it comes to making decisions for an entire country. And I feel like Congress can make that decision better because there's more people than just one president.
So in Congress, there are 435 members. Sometimes things move really slow. So what if there's actually something that you deem as an emergency and the president's one person? Do you think in that time that a bad side of Congress only having that power is it might take a really long time for that piece of legislation to get passed? Do you think it's maybe a pro that if it's one person it goes faster?
I mean, I do, because like it's good and bad, because if the president, he can make a decision, and if it's a good decision, Congress can take time and vote on it. But if the president, if it's really an emergency, then the president can, he can claim it an emergency and get it dealt with right away. But if it's not like a real emergency, Congress should have a check and see like, okay, is this really an emergency? And then if they could like shut it down or something.
So I want to follow up on, because Randy, you said something in Maya's previous answer, and specifically talking to Abraham Lincoln. You say he's a good example of an executive, but when he was president, he suspended the writ of habeas corpus, which Article 1, Section 9 says you can't. So do you think it's okay for a president to violate an aspect of the Constitution when he or she knows he shouldn't do it at all? You're giving me the affirmative. Why?
I think it is, because if it's actually an emergency, then you should be able to break the Constitution. But it depends what that emergency is. If it was Trump that is making a national emergency because of the illegal flow of immigrants crossing our border, then that wouldn't really be a national emergency for you to break the Constitution. But if it is national emergency worthy, then yes. But it has to be very strict and slim when you can do that.
Yeah, I think there should be, if they are able to violate the Constitution, there should be many checks on it, because it's always a fear that the president could have too much power. And since the president does have so much like different things that they can express their opinions on, I think it's important to make sure that they never have too much power, and it's always very limited and by checks and balances.
So going off what Mr. Trombley asked, if you do violate the Constitution, then what's the point of even having it? Like, if we're just not going to listen to what it says, why do we have it in the first place? Do you think it should be respected?
I do. I think that having the Constitution is a really good thing, and if we were to get rid of it, then the president could go off and do whatever. I think it's a very rare occasion when the president thinks that he should violate it, and when he does violate it, it has to be for a great reason.
So the five of you articulated and prepared when the president goes well beyond the scope of their power, that there are checks to kind of curtail their power. It's like, nope, you've fallen out of line, we're going to rein your power back in. Charlotte, you mentioned one of the examples is impeachment. It's been announced this week that two of the Oregon representatives, Representatives Bonamici and Blumenauer, said they would support doing additional impeachment hearings to figure out what has really gone on. If you were a member of Congress and you had to vote whether or not to impeach a president, it could be President Trump, regardless of who the executive is, what reasons would you vote for an article of impeachment? Why would you vote to impeach a sitting president?
Well, in the Constitution it says that the president can be impeached for bribery, treason, or other misdemeanors. So that would be the reason. That would be some of the reasons that a president could be impeached.
Also, if it were like major crimes, like if he was like meddling with, well, in the election, I don't think that, I think it's terrible that Russia affected it, and I don't know. The Mueller report came out and it said that it wasn't exactly Trump's fault that Russia meddled with the election, but there's also the obstruction of justice, which he said there have been 18 accounts of that.
You guys talk about checks and balances and the president having power. Do you think that the president has too much or too little power right now?
Right now, I believe that the president has too much power, especially with the ability to tweet out and sway the public very easily, allowing everyone to see what you're saying, even if it's not necessarily true or factual. Especially with the Emergencies Act, the president can declare a national emergency with no oversight except for the judicial branch, and the president can possibly abuse this power for their own reasons instead of to protect the country in a national emergency.
Yeah, sorry. I also think that it's important to remember that, especially like in modern times, social media is often accessed by a lot of younger people, and so it's kind of hard to tell what's true and what's not, and the president, because he has the freedom of speech and is allowed to say what he wants, can say just about whatever he wants on social media, which can very inaccurately display information to a lot of the youth that can be on those platforms.
I also agree with Charlotte by the president being having too much power, because a president that doesn't even have any political background can even become the president, as we've seen in the 2016 election, where we have seen Russian meddling with the electoral, meddling with the election, and also we know that the electoral college is not working as well as the founding fathers wanted to make it work, because we have somebody that doesn't have the popular vote can still win the election, which to me, and I think our whole group, doesn't really make any sense. And to this day, we have the National Popular Vote Initiative trying to bring down that the electoral college so that we can have voting that actually makes more sense than the electoral college.
Nice way to finish. All right.
Okay, I focused a lot on voting and stuff on Unit 6, and that national popular vote, I am shocked you know that. That shows such a high level of understanding of the president and the issues, so I really like that example because that is something that is going on right now. And I also liked all of your guys' opinions and how you guys really looked at the issues and all the powers the
Judicial review gives the judicial branch the power to declare a law or an executive order passed by the president unconstitutional. Without judicial review, our government would not have a reliable method of applying the Constitution, as the framers wanted under the Supremacy Clause. To make this happen, judicial review was established in an 1803 case, Marbury v. Madison.
This was the case that solidified the court's power of judicial review. Marbury v. Madison was the first Supreme Court case to declare an act of Congress unconstitutional. William Marbury, an appointee of John Adams, was not allowed into the judiciary by legislation, so he used the judicial branch to overturn its rejection. Overall, this ruling had a large impact on the powers of the judicial branch.
The idea of judicial review spurred from multiple historical documents. In Federalist 16, Alexander Hamilton stated that the majesty of the national authority must be manifested through the medium of the court's justice. The use of the word majesty implies that Hamilton feared the president could potentially end up abusing his power rather than balancing it among others. Montesquieu's book, Spirit of Laws, published in 1748, also influenced judicial review, as he believed in systems like checks and balances that help ensure power is separated.
There are a few ways judges choose to interpret the Constitution, but some methods are more effective than others. One way for the courts to do this is based on the literal meaning of the words, but some words are broad, unclear, and can become an obstacle. For example, Article 1 states that Congress has the power to make all laws necessary and proper, but how do justices reliably determine exactly what is necessary and proper?
An additional method is to interpret the words while also being mindful of the framers' intentions and fundamental principles of government. Lastly, judges can look at current issues to bend the words of the Constitution, but it allows them to be very flexible with their rulings.
These different methods generally create two sides of interpretation, one of which is strict construction, or originalism. Originalism is when justices follow the words of the Constitution very closely. The flip side is broad construction, where judges see the Constitution open to more interpretation. These conflicting methods create the split rulings so prevalent in judicial review.
An example of the Supreme Court using originalism to rule is in the 2008 case, Heller v. Columbia, which reviewed a strict D.C. gun law making it difficult to possess a firearm. It was challenged in court under the Second Amendment, where the majority opinion said that nowhere in the Constitution clearly limits guns to just militias.
On the other hand, broad construction was recently used in 2016, Whole Woman's Health v. Hellerstedt. A Texas law made it challenging for women to get abortions, and some said that the law violated the 14th Amendment. The Supreme Court ruled it unconstitutional, taking into account modern values and social needs in their decision.
The implementation of judicial review has improved the efficiency of our government, which leads us to believe that its establishment is imperative to prevent the abuse of power and keep our democracy in check. For instance, in the Supreme Court case Ledoux v. Gilley, the legality of a city ordinance that limited the placement of signs in residents' homes was challenged. The Supreme Court restored their First Amendment rights and improved the country's judiciary to protect the right to liberty.
Even though judicial review is beneficial, it can be harmful as seen in some Supreme Court cases. Currently, conservative justices are the majority, using solely originalism in their rulings. This may cause more real-world consequences in the long run.
The Constitution is the structure holding up our government, but as Thomas Jefferson said, the Constitution is a mere thing of wax in the hands of the judiciary, which they may twist and shape into any form they please. Thus, judicial review enhances the ability to conform the Constitution for the good of the country.
Okay. First question is, one of the things that Justice Sonia Sotomayor has praised in her recent court opinions over the last 30 years is being able to use current examples or real world or lived experience to shape what her opinions will be. If you were a justice of the Supreme Court, do you think that's a position you would take when kind of deciding on a case, and why?
I do think so, because overall, the Constitution was written in a very different time than where we are today. And so we have different issues that we're dealing with than what the framers expected. So we need to take into consideration real world consequences and social constructs that we experience throughout our lives. And if I was a justice, then I would use those and use more broad construction in order to make rulings.
Yeah, for example, in the 2018 case Trump v. Hawaii, they ruled that Trump's travel ban was constitutional. But the problem with this is that when the framers were making the Constitution, they didn't realize that this would be a problem, so like immigrants and stuff like that. So now this is blocking travel for thousands of people that might not be terrorists and just want to come to the country for new opportunities.
Yes, I do agree with my colleagues. I think it is important to have no bias in the rulings, but it is also important as time goes on to follow the Constitution, because the Constitution doesn't change, so our opinions do need to change to to shape around what is fair and what is not, to keep the structure of our government safe.
You guys talk a lot about judicial review, obviously, and going with that is reviewing things that are constitutional. But sometimes there's a thing called judicial activism where people feel that judges rule based on their own opinions and not necessarily what's the law. Do you think that's a problem or not?
I do think that this is a problem. Justices are not supposed to necessarily have their own opinions in the rulings. This can cause problems. So these are the 5-4 rulings in many Supreme Court cases, and this needs to be addressed because opinions are not a very good option.
This might be reasons why there can be maybe bad decisions in judicial activism, like some people say, because justices need to interpret the Constitution, as we've said before, but as this current time of our country and how split our country is, and how any person is going to be on one side or other, and that's why the Justice Kavanaugh is so important, because he is definitely right side leaning, and he's going to definitely have his opinions on different issues, be more right side leaning, and maybe have his opinions leak their way into their rulings.
I think judicial activism can be important but there also is a check on the judicial branch. From the president can choose to elect which justices. And an example of judicial activism is in the Supreme Court case Richardson v. Ramirez, when someone believed that states should be able to say that felons can't vote.
Henry, I'd like to follow up on one of the points you raised in my first question around real-world experience and expand that discussion a bit. In a 2011 interview, Justice Ginsburg had acknowledged that one of the things she likes to consider when casting her vote on a case is how other governments around the world kind of value certain priorities or have weighed in on decisions. Do you think that's something worth considering in addition to real-world experience or your lived experience when weighing in on a case, or should it really stick to just the legal merit? Because I like where you're going. I'm curious to hear your thoughts as well as all 5 of you. Is we have our own system of laws. It's how we operate. It's our system of government and our values. Should we consider global perspectives or how other governments have weighed in as we decide how our rights are applied to our citizens?
Yes, I do think that's an option. I don't think it should be just based on that, obviously, but other countries, it's kind of like teamwork in different groups like we did here. We look at different groups and we see what's working for them and what's not working for them, and we can take that into consideration when trying to make our country a better place.
Yeah, I mean, the U.S. is is a country that's greatly admired by countries all over the world. So by the U.S. making decisions that show a true government and a true democracy, other countries can see that as an opportunity for them to grow.
As a country, if a country is by itself, it wouldn't work as well if, like Henry said, as a team, if multiple countries learn from one another to make their place better for their people.
Eric, I would like to follow up on your opening statement, specifically on your Federalist 16 citation, where you had acknowledged that Hamilton kind of held this judicial branch as a justice system, one to really strive to look towards. I'd be curious, why do you think Hamilton thought that? Why did he put so much value in this particular branch of government? Because it's one even today that we look to settle so many of our biggest, our most controversial issues. This body that we don't elect is one that we value so much. I'm curious from you, based on your understanding, why that was the case then, and probably why you think that is. Because it was a really, really powerful quote that you gave. I'd be curious to hear what you think about it.
I think what Eric is probably thinking of said, just not coming up with, is Revolutionary War, we just came off under the leadership of King George, and that was a really tyrannous leader. And so I think the majesty is what he's referring to, is that maybe the judicial is so important because it really is what is the most important check to prevent the abuse of power from the president and prevent these actions that are not constitutional from happening, like in the case U.S. v. Nixon, where it's not just a law that you can rule unconstitutional, it can be an action. In this case, it was executive privilege, and so it is just important so that it isn't ruled unconstitutional, that the president can't do anything that's non-democratic.
Yes, I agree. Another example of this is in the Supreme Court case, Virginia Board of Education v. Barnett, when students did not salute the flag because they were in a family of Jehovah's Witnesses, and the school said that they could go to reform schools, and this violated their First Amendment rights of freedom of speech.
All right, so let's see here. We go straight down the line from here to here and go right into the things that really just kind of blew my mind again. Henry, starting off, I think being able to talk about using international perspectives as a way to foster teamwork as how we define our values was a really powerful way to answer the question. I absolutely loved how you tackled that. And then also going down in the future question, talking about U.S. v. Nixon, and then going back in the previous answer to talk about, the fear or danger of judicial activism leading to kind of bad and insufficient decisions that have a lasting impact. I thought just your three substantive follow-up answers were really powerful, and they were substantive, and they're really on point, but also set a frame for how all your other teammates kind of step up. So I want to applaud on just all three of those specifics because they were across the board outstanding. So we have, for you, two things here is
The First Amendment, written in 1789, guarantees freedom of religion and is made up of two clauses, the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause, both equally important.
The First Amendment guarantees the freedom to express and practice any religion, which includes the Establishment and Free Exercise Clause. The difference between these clauses is the Establishment Clause makes it clear that Congress cannot enforce a national religion. The Establishment Clause prevents the government from establishing a specific religion, and in doing so, prevents the government from discriminating against any religion.
On the other hand, the Free Exercise Clause states the rights of the individual citizen to engage in and practice any religion they please. This right is important because it protects citizens from the government creating laws that target a certain religion. The founders believed religious freedom was a natural right everybody had. They included the Establishment Clause because they wanted a clear separation between religion and state to ensure religious freedom. Religious freedom became very important in America because in Europe, religious discrimination was used to suppress and kill non-believers and often ended up in religious wars. James Madison drafted the First Amendment in the Bill of Rights in 1785, which gave everybody the freedom to adopt any religion or no religion at all.
In Santa Fe Independent School District v. Jane Doe, school kids had a prayer that celebrated God. The justices determined that the prayer about God bringing them to victory was public speaking and had too close a connection between government and religion. While the students' ability to freely exercise their religion was limited, the justice determined that public schools cannot promote the establishment of religions.
The Free Exercise Clause is also important when it comes to religious rights. Religion also plays an important part in freedom. As Benjamin Rush once said, without religion there can be no virtue. Without virtue there can be no liberty, and liberty is the object and life of all Republican governments.
Religion relates to many current-day topics like abortion and vaccination. Many religions like Catholicism condemn abortion unless the mother's health is at risk, or cases of rape and or incest. In Burwell v. Hobby Lobby, the justices ruled 5-4 in favor of Hobby Lobby. Even though health care is required under the Affordable Care Act for religious corporations to fund women's health, including abortion, it allows for private companies to opt out as a specific requirement to protect their religious liberties, thus allowing for this company to continue to fund the overall health care plan while protecting their religious liberties.
Another current event in relation to religion are vaccinations and how these parents or caretakers who are of a certain religion believe that they should not be vaccinated or have their children vaccinated because of their religious liberties. This could also pose a threat upon their religious liberties because of the conflict between the 14th Amendment and the First Amendment. The 14th Amendment guarantees equal protection, yet the First Amendment grants the right to practice your religion. Educational school boards are conflicted when one's practice clashes against their right to equal protection when unvaccinated students demand a right to education too.
The free exercise and establishment clause are both very important when it comes to freedom of religion. The justices ruled in Y v. Trump that when Trump issued a 90-day travel ban on mainly Muslim countries that he was not in violation of the First Amendment's establishment clause.
In Obergefell v. Hodges, the justices ruled 5-4 in favor of same-sex couples, stating that the 14th Amendment guarantees the right to marry one of the same sex, as just in the manner of opposite sexes, no matter what state you reside in. According to the evidence shown by the Supreme Court cases, the free exercise and establishment clause should only be limited when it restricts other people's liberties and rights. Limitations should be imposed if it creates a problem that biases both sides of the argument.
The Founding Fathers believed that freedom of religion was a natural right everybody should have because of religious wars that broke out in Europe. As John Adams said, nothing is more dreaded than the national government meddling with religion.
All right. Okay, so Frederick, so in the prepared since you talk about public schools and prayer, so my question is this. If you're at Westland before you come down, and you all get together and you want to do, Ms. Campbell leads you in a prayer that says, let's focus, get ready for today, and it's actually like a religious prayer that says, we're going to have a good, competition round today. Do you think by Ms. Campbell leading you in an actual religious prayer to give yourself good blessings for a good round today, that she would be violating your rights for an individual free exercise of religion?
I do believe it would be violating the freedom of religion because it should be your parents who, for you to choose your religion and also your choice as well, not your teachers.
And this was actually discussed in a case, I believe it was Santa Fe Independent School District v. Jane Doe, and before every football game, the students would lead a prayer saying how God would bring them to victory, and this slowly traveled to the Supreme Court and was eventually banned, and the prayer was determined to be public speaking and was therefore removed from the pre-game ritual.
So, true. So again, I guess my question is, if students do it voluntarily, should that be a problem? If you choose to be a part of it, if you don't want to be a part of the prayer, there's no harm, no foul. But if students, like your peers, choose to initiate it, is it right for the school system, the adults, to tell you not to do it? If you're voluntary choosing.
I think if it's voluntary, if you want to do it or not, then it is not violating your freedom of religion rights because you can easily choose to opt out of it. And if you want to do it, if you are religious, you can choose to participate.
And the free exercise clause lets them do it because as if they don't try to persuade people to join their prayer and just let them do it voluntarily, then it's not disrupting the class or education in any way, then it's perfectly fine for them to do so.
Well, I'm going to have to disagree because because the founders wanted absolutely no connection with government or religion. And if it's a public school and there's an option for kids to go into a separate room or a separate classroom and have this prayer, then it could be seen as if this one kid doesn't join in, then he could be made fun of, or it's kind of like peer pressuring. But if it's a private school, if you're going to Jesuit, then they have these classes and they'll have prayers. And you don't necessarily have to be religious to go there because it's a private school and your parents want to pay for your best education. But it's allowed for them to have these prayers.
Okay, I really like that. And going off of something you said is government being separate from religion. Do you think that that's a good idea that they are separate, or do you think that it's okay that they mix?
I believe that they should be separated because problems can easily arise when the government meddles with religion. Because if government tried to establish a national religion, people who practice their own religions would be forced and would have their own rights taken away, which would just having their freedom taken off, their freedom of religion will also take away other freedoms and rights.
That's kind of like in Europe back then. It would be religion against religion trying to
convince other people to join the religion, and if they don't, they would kill them. So it's kind of like religious wars that broke out. So I think that government should stay separate from religion.
Okay, you guys talk a lot about vaccines and religious beliefs around vaccines. Sometimes in some states there are religious exempts that you don't have to get a vaccine if you have a religious reason behind it. Do you think that that should exist, or should we have no exceptions regardless of your religion, or if it disagrees with it?
I believe there should be no exceptions because I want to be safe, and if one of my students or peers is unvaccinated, it's jeopardizing my health and other students' health. And I'm not religious, so I believe in the 14th Amendment over the First.
I do somewhat agree with Frederick because it's clashing the 14th and the First Amendment, the free exercise and the equal rights. Because if a student comes to school unvaccinated from the mumps or something, he could spread this disease to other people, and that would be therefore violating their 14th Amendment rights. And I believe there is a law right now in Oregon that states you can opt out for the first 2 years of school, and then you must be vaccinated, or you're not allowed to come at all.
I'm gonna have to disagree with that because it's the free exercise clause, so you have the right to exercise it. And if students are in danger of getting infected by other diseases, then the unvaccinated students should have regular checkups to make sure they're not going to spread a deadly virus to everybody.
I agree with Alex and disagree with Freddie on this one, because you have your right to practice your own religion, and if your religion tells you that you cannot be vaccinated because there's something in your religious liberties, then get daily checkup, or not daily checkups, but maybe monthly checkups to make sure that you're not having these diseases and spreading them across the school.
So I want to add push a little bit further on this, which is if a student or if a parent chooses to not have their child vaccinated because they know with proof from a doctor that if they get this particular prescription that they'll have other, they'll get a rash or some other physical condition because of it, do you think that student should be exempt from getting a vaccination and be allowed to attend the school?
Well, this is kind of veering away from the religion aspect because it's more of a medical standpoint, and if the child will be okay with getting this vaccination. So I think then it would be okay if the student wasn't vaccinated, not coming to school, because their actual medical health is in danger.
Also, there's a big debate about if a parent wants to practice their religion and they don't want to take their child to any doctor, or they just don't believe that, the medicine that sometimes we use goes against their religion, but they're putting their child at harm. Do you think that the free exercise for religion should stop if their kid is at harm of, being very sick?
I believe.
And you are saved by the bell because she just told me.
He was ready to go.
I know.
I have no idea how to answer that.
So, all right. So I'm going to start with, I am truly in awe right now because, in particular, not just the debate on kind of student prayer and religion, but getting into the religious points on vaccinations, and this is why. Oregon legislature just had a bill dealing with this issue, and the proposed bill removed the religious exemption provision. And so the only provision that allowed was if you had a medical exception proven by a doctor. And so there are two parts to this as a whole that I want to signal and then get to the specifics.
Enslave the liberty of one human being and the liberties of the world are put in peril. William Lloyd Garrison. In the current world, the interaction between countries and the flow of ideas throughout these countries is extremely important.
The founders of the United States were influenced by several countries while writing the U.S. Constitution. The most basic foundations of U.S. government, Republican government, the common good, and civic virtue, were derived from ancient Greece and Rome. Ideas gathered from European philosophers such as Baron Montesquieu, who influenced the U.S. separation of powers, and the Great Britain philosopher John Locke, who created the original ideas of natural-born rights, life, liberty, and property. All of these philosophies influenced the U.S. Constitution and Bill of Rights.
One way nations interact with each other in the present day is through agreements. In 2017, the U.S. and China pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord. The Paris Climate Accord is an agreement to provide funding and plans for countries to limit the amount of pollution in our atmosphere. Because climate change is already impacting our planet, such as forest fires here in Oregon, it is important to be part of the solution to this issue.
The reason the U.S. government could leave the agreement and connect with countries in other ways was because of the powers given to each branch in the Constitution to interact with other countries. These powers are given by Article 2, Section 2.
Although the nations of the world are highly dependent on each other, there are ways of contact that the different countries have not agreed on. President Trump enacted a travel ban in January of 2017, restricting travel to 7 countries for 90 days, including Iran, Libya, North Korea, Somalia, Syria, Venezuela, and Yemen. Many U.S. citizens objected to the ban, and countless protests occurred throughout the country. Hawaii claimed it violated the First Amendment's Establishment Clause and took it to the Supreme Court in the case Trump versus Hawaii, but the Supreme Court ruled it was constitutional.
One organization that tries to keep world peace and prosperity is the United Nations, which formed after World War II. The UN is made up of 193 countries throughout the world. Their goals are to help nations work together to improve the lives of poor people, conquer hunger, disease, illiteracy, and to encourage respect for each other's rights and freedom.
The UN has several formal documents, including the Universal Declaration of Human Rights document. The UN human rights are the basic rights no citizen of any country in the United Nations can be deprived of. The document was largely based off and influenced by the U.S. Bill of Rights.
Another organization the U.S. was a part of was NAFTA. NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, united the U.S., Canada, and Mexico in trade regulations. Its purpose was to make the U.S. more competitive in the global market by increasing business investment. A new version of this agreement, called the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or USMCA, is in the process of succeeding NAFTA. One more agreement the U.S. approved of is the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA, which is an agreement regulating Iran's nuclear power. 6 countries, China, France, Germany, Russia, the United Kingdom, and the United States, gave incentive to Iran to stop producing nuclear power. Recently, the U.S. pulled out of the agreement, and the idea of war with Iran is plausible.
Over time, some laws about foreign policy in the U.S. have been overturned. In Arizona v. the United States, the court ruled that 3 of the 4 provisions following along with Arizona's SB 1070 were unconstitutional, as it requires legal non-citizens to carry registration papers with them at all times and allow police to make an arrest on an individual they suspect is an illegal immigrant. This influenced other countries by the number of immigrants staying or leaving.
While the U.S. government system may not be perfect, the U.S. Constitution, ratification, and amending process has guided nearly all constitutional governments from other countries. These countries have set up their government with branches, a presidential figure, and checks and balances. The Bill of Rights is immensely important to the U.S. and other countries that base their government off of it. Because the U.S. had the first clear constitution, countries with similar ideas followed in the suit of the U.S.
One of the basic principles of U.S. foreign policy and government is isolationism. This is the idea President Washington included in his farewell address when he said, "It is our true policy to steer clear of permanent alliances with any portion of the foreign world."
The U.S. and other world countries are extremely dependent on each other. That is how we, as a new generation, can make a difference in the world if we understand it.
Would you guys be able to define sovereign nations? What are sovereign nations?
Sovereign nation is an independent country recognized by other countries. An example of a non-sovereign nation is Taiwan.
So basically, sovereign nation is a country that has clear defined borders, like any major world superpower, Russia, U.S., these are all independent sovereign nations.
You guys talk a lot about climate change and other countries being involved in that. An issue so big that affects everyone, do you guys think it's important that we communicate with other countries to be able to make a plan that helps everyone because it affects the whole world? Or do you think we should just focus on our own citizens and keeping them safe?
I think that everyone should be a part of this, every country in the world, because it will affect every country. Even if one country isn't producing that much waste, it will still affect that country. So I think it's important that everyone helps in this issue.
And also, it is the future of our planet. It's not just the future of one country, because we're a whole planet together, so we need to work together and make sure we are uniting in agreements and regulations to make sure pollution isn't the destruction of our humanity.
Oh, go ahead.
I believe that if you want to see if this is a country's matter or is it the whole world's matter, I believe you should look at the effects. So global warming melts ice caps, which is going to flood the world. So I believe this is a world matter, and I believe it should be brought to the United Nations to discuss it.
So, Teddy, you segue nicely into my question because you designed it's a tension of, in order to solve a problem, we partner with as many people as possible who are sharing the issue, or it's we're going to do it our own and not partner with anybody. And one of your kind of lenses to figure out which way we go is effect. Kind of what is the actual effect of the work you're trying to do? What other kind of factors would you consider when figuring out, okay, climate change you've acknowledged, as Elliot said, okay, it truly impacts everybody, so we should all find a way to work together to solve the problem. How do you figure out when it's, let's work with as many people as possible versus, I'll go on it by myself because I know I can figure it out?
I think it depends on if it's who's it is really affecting, because if it's only affecting citizens of a singular country or 2 or 3 countries, then those countries should work together. But if it's just an area, then it's only that area should work on it. If it's the whole world, then the whole world should work on it.
Are there issues that you think we should be working on globally because it's multiple people? In fact, you've identified climate change as one. Are there other ones where it's like, yeah, in order to figure it out, we really got to find a way to work together?
Well, there's currently a trade war between China and the United States, so that is something we really need to work out because that could really affect both the citizens. The United States recently banned China's Huawei phone. They banned their 5G because of the fear of Chinese government spying on U.S. citizens, and France and a lot of Japanese companies followed suit.
Immigration. So immigration, say people all want to immigrate to the United States, so technically it only affects the United States because all the people want to come here. But there are people from all around the world that want to immigrate here. Do you think that's a problem that we should fix for the whole world if people are fleeing from violence or unsafe conditions in their country, even if they're only coming in the U.S.? Or do you think only the U.S. should fix that problem?
I think it should be an entire world issue, as if most of the time reasons people are fleeing the reason is because of war or no opportunity, and I think that means we need to help those areas grow opportunity, or we need to stop the fighting against citizens in those countries. So I think that's a whole world issue.
Yeah, I agree that one of the best ways that we can help with that is providing funds or helping in other ways to those countries in which the immigrants are fleeing from.
And one of the ways we can help is using the power of the UN to try and create bills and agreements to help boost that country's economy or power.
Abdu, I'd like to follow up on one of the citations you gave in the prepare, because I thought it was a really good one, which is your citation on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And this is a question for all 6 of you, because it lists a whole series of rights that, if you're part of the UN, here are the rights that we value as fundamental for all nations. Are there any rights in there that you feel like that is an amazing right, we need to make sure that we codify this here in the United States?
Yes, in the UN's human rights, the 13th right, which is basically innocent until proven guilty, that is currently a big debate in the Guantanamo Bay in Cuba, because Americans are now holding pirates. Back then they were holding Afghanistan's, they labeled enemy combatants from the 9/11 attack. So I believe that it is kind of controversy because they were held there without a trial. So technically they haven't been proven to be an enemy combatant. Many dispute it, but the U.S. still holds them there.
I'm going to get to Abdu. He was reaching for the mic when you were
Yeah.
answering. Yeah, I think you had another example of this? Sure. Okay. So, Teddy, true on the Gipno cases, but some of those individuals are not United States citizens. They're individuals from, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iran, who were believed to have helped cause the attack on the United States. So I guess, yeah, they were detained there. So do you think it matters if that they were or were not United citizens? That right of being innocent until proven guilty should apply to everybody, even if they committed a serious act against a country like 9/11 against the United States?
I believe that they should be convicted first and then sent there for detaining, because UN human rights is an international right. So every citizen from every country in the UN should be allowed to have that right. There is currently 192, I believe, nations in the United Nations. The only two nations that aren't in there is the Holy Seas and Pakistan. So Afghanistan is a part of the United Nations, so I believe their citizens should have that right.
In the case Boumediene vs. Bush, an example like this is shown. Enemy combatants, well, they were named enemy combatants, were kept at Guantanamo Bay, and they were not U.S. citizens, and they were kept there without due process. And so they brought their case to the Supreme Court, and they got their rights to due process in their Fifth Amendment rights.
And also, if it is an issue between multiple countries instead of just an issue with the United States or another single country, it could be solved in the UN's World Court instead of just a United States court.
And also, if the detainees are Afghanistan, then it can be solved between the U.S. and Afghanistan.
Okay. You have a bad job, Ms. Campbell.
I want him to go on.
I know, and that's the feeling you want to give us, like we want to get on and like not like the fact that we've just been cut off. Go ahead.
So I was on Unit 6 this past year, and I was going in thinking, oh, I've done all of this. I'm not going to learn anything. But you guys were so well prepared. I learned something new about my own unit that I had studied for a year, which shows how amazing you guys did to prepare, because I didn't really know that much about Guantanamo Bay. And you guys all showed me the court cases and how that affects the United States that I didn't know. So that really, to me, shows that even someone who maybe studied this material really in depth, you guys are still bringing in new examples. And at least for my unit during nationals and state, we had an issue about bringing in history and talking about what happened in the past. And I thought you guys did a really good job as for Unit 6 for bringing in past examples and history, because Unit 6 is generally what we're talking about right now, and I thought that your debate about this past and our history and how we should apply it now really showed the depth of understanding that you guys have, not only about history, but how it affects, us right now. And the climate change is a really big debated topic, and you guys really had some good perspective on how we should handle it, and that it's a whole world issue, so we shouldn't just be trying to fix it for ourselves, but for everyone else. So I thought it was really well done. You guys did an amazing and outstanding job.
I would echo everything that's said. So here are some specific details I think that deserve and need to be called out. So Elliot, and first of all, prepared in talking about NAFTA and the agreements with China, Japan, and other countries in the Iran nuclear deal. Being able to talk about the three of them together, how they align and how they're different, and what makes them different. It's a really clean way of doing it, and being able to talk about those agreements together is not an easy way to write that part of it prepared. So I want to applaud your teammates for being able to deliver that part, that complex issue, really clean and tight. And so for your answers on both climate change and immigration, what you did in both answers, that you said a really fundamental umbrella perspective, which is it's the future for all, which then led both, in the case of climate change, both Amy and Teddy to follow up with a nice 2-second and 3 answer. And we begin.
The constitutional government limits the powers of the persons or groups running the government. Constitutions organize governments and prevent abuses of power. The framers faced many questions while making such a document, as they wished to preserve the ideas of their influencers. What was made was a strong document establishing separations of power and preventing abuses of power, along with helping prevent further abuses of power in the future.
When the framers were creating the Constitution, they thought of a way to share the powers of government. They would follow philosopher James Harrington's ideas, separating government into 3 branches: the executive, legislative, and judicial. These branches use a system of checks and balances to use their power to the full extent of balancing each other. This counter to abuse of power was summarized by John Adams, saying that by balancing each of these powers against the other two, that the efforts in human nature toward tyranny can alone be checked and restrained. However, there have been examples of unchecked powers, and these include current Turkey and Venezuela.
The framers were not only influenced by ideas, but by historical documents. The Magna Carta is a strong example of controlling and terminating the abuse of an unchecked power, restraining King John's tyrannical abilities. His nobles made him decide to either sign the Magna Carta or face rebellion, resulting in near certainty threatening. King John chose to sign the Magna Carta, preventing further abuse of power. In American history, examples of abuse of power are prevalent, and with the United States Supreme Court, they come to public attention with ease. One such example is McRae versus United States. McRae advocated that a tax leveled on his work was unconstitutional, and that it was an abuse of power, as it forced him to pay excess money before selling his product. However, Supreme Court deemed the move as falling under the enumerated powers. This stands as a lasting threshold for what constitutes an abuse of power. Yet there are times in which powerful people go too far. An exemplar was the impeachment of Andrew Johnson due to an abuse of his powers. His unapproved termination of people in political offices was called out, and as stated in Article 1, Section 3, his impeachment trial was heard.
James Madison, the father of the Constitution, had other ideas about abuse of power, mainly separation of government and types of government. He defined two more main forms of government, Republican and Democratic. A Republican government gives representatives of the people the ability to run the government much like the ancient Romans. A Democratic government allows the people themselves to run it. The framers were heavily influenced by both, and Rome was known as a representative democracy. This form took key ideas from both, creating a government with officials elected by the people to take the powers that Roman officials once had. This government type was somewhat different from a Republican government, as its representatives were of the people rather by the people, helping establish government in their own country. There are also different types of government not dictated by a constitution. These would be a dictatorial or autocratic government, which are dictated by officials and don't put limits on their leaders' power.
Autocratic or dictatorial governments typically don't have a constitution and are therefore unconstitutional governments. There are many nations with unconstitutional governments, one of them being North Korea. This nation violates the fundamentals of the U.S. Constitution and the natural rights proposed by John Locke. Examples of these violations are modern-day slaves, punishing people with torture and arbitrary arrests, and ethnic cleansing. This does not mean that America is without its own problems. In the Supreme Court case Trump v. Hawaii, President Trump wanted to suspend the entry of foreign nationals from 7 countries for 90 days, commonly deemed a travel ban. This created many open-ended political issues, such as whether the president has the power to imply such an order, which hasn't been truly answered yet. Important documents, such as the Constitution, are key in solving problems such as these.
Constitutional governments are some of the most organized and effective governments. Certain strategies have been used to prevent abuse of power in these governments, from historical examples such as the Magna Carta to adapting to modern-day issues because of the Amendment Clause. As C.J. Redwine said, power is neither good nor evil. It's what people do with it that matters.
Yeah, I know. So Cameron, I love that last quote, so I don't want to follow. It's what people do with it what matters. So let's talk about kind of the power of the president for a second, in the sense that what do we do when, a president, for example, uses too much power that negatively impacts a lot of people? What can people do to address that issue?
One of the most common ways people can get their voice across to government bodies is through protesting. People can advocate for what they believe by protesting, whether it's formal or informal, and a lot of the times it can draw national attention.
Do you think that it's important that government has limits, like that they don't have too much power?
Well, yes, I do think it's important that it has limits, because if they did, they would probably make laws or actions that the majority of the people don't want, and they wouldn't get a say otherwise.
With limits on the government, how much do you think that the limits should be within the government, like checks and balances among branches, rather than just limits in like a constitution?
I believe that it should be, the people should still have a say, but that doesn't mean that they can make their own laws. It's not for other things besides the Constitution, I suppose. It doesn't have to be too extreme. It can be pretty balanced.
So one of the things you talked about is the role of the individual in terms of, like, I think to Cameron's point, protesting, being engaged. One of the things right now that is being debated in Oregon in terms of people actually being engaged in a community is about lowering the voting age from 18 to 16, or even lower in some cases, so that more individuals can actually be, like, have more say in their community, because there are a number of things going that directly impact them, like climate change. So given that, do you think that the voting age should be lowered so that more people can have a direct say in what's going on in both their local and their state governments?
Well, so the reason why some people may think that they want to keep it at the way it is because a lot of the time, people younger than the age of 18 may sometimes be a little more immature or irresponsible or lack an understanding. But oftentimes, people that do think that it should be lowered is, like you said, because they are also heavily affected by the future of what lies in the U.S.
It gives more of a voice to the people, yet the maturity factor is also an issue.
I also feel that it gives those younger kids it gives more ideas it's more open and it's different things that they think, and the kids or the younger people would be I don't know, they would have different ideas, a different way of thinking than the ones that are above age of 18.
So you all have talked about either no, we shouldn't reduce the age, or you kind of have yeah, we could, but there are some things that need to be done. So say I'm a lawmaker right now and I actually would like to vote yes to actually lower the voting age. What do you think I could or should do to ensure that if 16-year-olds like Aaliyah are given the right to vote at the age of 16, what should they need to do to actually demonstrate or show that they do have the skills or knowledge or really capacity to show that they can tackle some of the big complex issues when it comes to voting? Because you've identified a number of concerns that are real, so how do we go about dealing with it?
Well, it's difficult to deal with that without violating the 14th Amendment and the Equal Protection Clause, because you're giving people either tests or some kind of trial or measure that they need to pass to be able to vote, which in general would disadvantage those with less materials or resources to learn about what they need to or do what they need to be able to vote.
Okay, so I'm wanting to do this, but you're making my job a little difficult. Darn. So what can I do, given to your right point on the 14th Amendment issue? Is there anything that we can do? And I'm honestly curious because I don't know what the answer is. You had to give me guidance that gets me to a yes. What could we do that addresses Cameron's legit argument? It's not an easy answer.
Do you guys think that the Constitution gives the government too much or too little power right now?
I'd say right now it puts enough limitations to give a voice to the people and allow the government to be powerful enough to run said country or the U.S.
I agree with that, I think.
Do you think that it's important that we have 3 branches, or should we do what other countries do and combine the executive and the legislative branch into one body? Do you think it's good we have 3 separate branches?
I think it's good that we have 3 branches, mainly separation of power and being able to balance and have each branch check each other. With 2 branches, I feel like it would be too little for each branch to be able to check each other.
So following on that, which of those 3 branches you all have identified, which one do you think is the most important?
none of them are really like the most important. They all kind of they all depend upon each other, and none of them can work without the other. So they all kind of they all kind of help each other out to make sure that our government is as balanced and as possible.
In my opinion, it's most important to have a well-run legislative branch because you're able to look at what's happening in states and address how states are being run in state government, along with how voting is managed. There's laws that are being passed within legislative branch that even if vetoed, they can repass, and having it unbiased and just pure, I guess would be the word, would help make it the most important, in my opinion, branch.
She's doing the part that I'm not going to like, which is cutting me off from asking questions. So I'm going to defer to any of my colleagues first to offer feedback, and then I'll conclude.
I thought you guys did a really good job. I really liked your prepared. I'm going to call you out specifically. I liked how you said that there's no one good branch. I like that shows that you know that all the three branches need each of them to work for it to be a functioning government. So I really like that. But overall, you guys did a very good job.
I'm Liam. I'm Logan.
I'm Mika. Okay. Unit 3. Article 2 of the Constitution lists the powers of the President of the United States. Describe how some of the powers of the Constitution gives to the President. Give examples of how presidents have actually used these powers. Some of the opponents of the Constitution feared the President would become a king and a tyrant. Why do you think this? Why do you think their fears were justified? Are there any powers you would like to see added to the presidency? Are there any powers now granted to the presidency that you think should be omitted? Explain your answers. You may begin.
A young nation was created and the president was at the forefront. As the Constitution was being written, it split the common people in two about the powers of the president.
Years of tyranny towards the American colonies put the country in great fear of a king, yet the framers of the United States seek to create a strong national government with a leader guiding the executive branch. Some feared some of these new powers. The Federalists tried to ease the fear of the Anti-Federalists by stating the need of a strong executive branch with a leader that can make decisions for the country. Well stated in Federalist 69, Hamilton showed the polarizing difference from the King of England to the American president. The American president would not be nearly as powerful and would be elected democratically.
The justification behind the fear of the Anti-Federalists is stated above by Thomas Hobbes, and that the condition of man is a condition of war against everyone. In other words, the Anti-Federalists feared that the president would be clouded by their own personal intentions. This fear was justified when the nation was young, as a new president seemed like another threat to the citizens of the United States.
The framers created a strong national government, divided the power among the federal and state governments, as well as protecting the liberties of the American citizens. They gave the United States President, under the power of Constitution Section 2, to act as Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, grant pardons and reprieves, hold Congress to special meetings, receive ambassadors, and veto laws passed in Congress. The President can also appoint cabinet members, White House or Supreme Court members, and place tariffs much like our current president's tariffs on China.
Presidents use their executive orders, such as Harry Truman's Executive Order 10,340, which allowed the government to seize privately owned steel mills. Presidents use pardons like how President Trump pardoned Louis Libby to Vice President Dick Cheney. Presidents have the power to nominate Supreme Court justices as he did with Kavanaugh last year. But just as relevant as it was, then the powers of the president seem unbalanced in more recent times.
To us, the powers of the presidency have potential for abuse of power and should be taken away. The first is overreach of power in executive orders. In a case involving Harry Truman's executive order, Youngstown Sheet and Tube Company v. Sawyer, the president suspended the basic rights of eminent domain under the Fifth Amendment. We believe a president should not have the ability to take away basic rights given to the citizens of the United States. Presidents in the past have suspended the writ of habeas corpus, including Abraham Lincoln. Recently in the case Bodine v. Bush, President Bush suspended the writ of habeas corpus on the war on terror. The plaintiff called to be tried under American rule, but a signed act by the president suspended these rights. No matter what, a president should not be able to alter our Bill of Rights.
Our current president was suspending his right in his travel ban early last year, showing large cracks in our rule of law and the strength in presidential power. Under the First Amendment and the Fifth Amendment, we believe the president had no right to stop other religions and people coming into the country.
We do not believe any powers should be added, but we do believe some powers are necessary for our government system. The Constitution allows the people to impeach the president. Andrew Johnson's impeachment is a perfect example of the process. Johnson was accused of a